I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist,
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
and this is When East
Meets West. Thankfully, over the past, I don't know, I guess maybe it's been 20 years since Brooke Shields wrote her book about postpartum depression. There's been a lot more awareness about struggles new mothers may face, particularly with regards to depressive symptoms. And today, Pete and I really want to talk about just sort of more broadly some of the other things that can show up for new moms. So it's not just postpartum depression. There's also postpartum anxiety disorders are fairly common, but also just sort of the struggles that new moms can face with regards to mental well-being and mental health, because and this is something, unfortunately extends beyond parenthood, but there's a lot of as like to call them, like fantasy narratives out there about what having a new baby is supposed to be like. And I think I know it really messes with people's heads,
Well,
right?
and I think for me as a man, I can never have a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I can't carry a
Well, you
baby.
can't. Yes.
I
Mm-hmm.
can't. I can't
Yeah.
carry.
Yes. You can.
Uh,
Yes.
and I have such strong empathy for women
Yes.
that have a new baby because I can't imagine what that's like in terms of like you can't sleep. I mean, really, your life is no longer yours, and everyone you talk to will be like, "Oh, but that was the greatest thing that has ever happened to me," and it also is one of the worst things. I mean, I don't really mean that, but I mean,
Well, what if the hardest things,
there
right?
are a
What are
lot
the
of
hard?
struggles
Yes,
with.
there's a lot of struggles.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And Brooke Shields' book was in 2006, and so you're
Okay,
right,
so
about
almost.
15
Okay, so
years ago.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
15 years ago.
And so that was like a big deal. And yet
Yes.
postpartum depression is like super, super common. It's more than half of women will experience some symptoms of postpartum depression. But I'm glad that you said that because we're going to talk more about anxiety because it's something that really doesn't get nearly enough attention, but that's also just as common.
Yeah, and I think that's something that maybe gets missed quite a bit because, I think, new parents can often, I would say accurately assume like they're going to be anxious, right? Especially if it's a first kid, right? They don't know what they're doing, right? So, yeah, it's
You mean there's
normative to
no
feel
rule
like
book on how to be a parent?
there. Well, well, interestingly enough, a lot of people think that there are, right? There's tons
Yeah.
of books that you can
Well,
read. We can get
apps
it.
and books and people have
Yes,
all this shit. And I'm
we
like,
can we
no,
can yeah, we can get into that in a minute. I would say like this
I'm
is the,
sorry.
well, no need to be sorry, just another
I
example
jumped.
of where the information overload of the current era,
Yeah,
tips into like too much information is actually not helpful,
that's right.
right? But
Well, it's
I
another part about it. Like when they're pregnant, they go for all these tests. I remember my sister-in-law was going for these tests about whether or not your child has Down syndrome. It's like they do that. It's like one of the first tests, and she was so anxious. And of course, she was anxious because they're so worried about what the outcome or what they may or
uh,
may not find.
absolutely, and so it's this, you know, there's a we're talking about, Pete and I are talking about here, like the disadvantage of knowing so much,
Hmm.
right? Or having the opportunity to potentially know.
Yeah,
That most of us operate from the assumption that the more information we have, the better. And unfortunately, that's not the case. This extends beyond issues related to pregnancy and postpartum because we can't know everything.
no,
Right. And that's like one of the biggest things that, we talk about on this podcast is like tolerating uncertainty, letting go of control. But kind of, moving us back to talk here about postpartum anxiety specifically, I would say because there's this awareness that, yeah, if like you're a new parent, like there's going to be some level of anxiety. I think a lot of times women that are actually struggling with postpartum anxiety, which is really like clinically significant anxiety. So this could
yeah.
be actually postpartum OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, postpartum generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, postpartum panic disorder, right? So these are things that can happen outside of pregnancy, but basically maybe somebody's never even had a presentation like this
That's
prior
right.
to having a kid. So,
And
not all
then,
the time. So sometimes they have, and it worsens after,
yeah.
but it shows up, and they think it's to be expected, and so
And
that
Nikki,
doesn't
this
get
was a big
reported.
piece of your practice. I don't know if is it still. I know it was in New York. It was a big piece of your practice.
It was. I don't treat it as much here in LA, only because we'll have her on the podcast at some point in the future. But my dear colleague and amazing reproductive psychiatrist, Dr. Jennifer Rhodes,
She's wonderful.
yeah, she's a amazing physician. she was in New York and actually has since moved to Colorado. So we shared a lot of cases, and I've learned just an immense amount from her as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, I worked a lot with
You
postpartum
did. I
and
remember
anxiety
that.
and
Yeah.
perinatal as well. So perinatal meaning like during pregnancy.
Right. Right.
Um,
By the way,
so
like a
yeah, tell
woman on
me.
the subway when their belly is that big,
Oh,
I'm always so anxious for them.
I know, I
I'm like, of
know.
course I'm going to give you my seat, and I can't believe that you're like so calmly just chilling on the subway.
I know, I know, I know. I mean, well, that's being from LA again. Just when I would see anybody with
Yeah.
children or someone pregnant going into the subway, someone carrying the
Oh,
stroller
I
down. I was like,
can't.
here, I was like, you just get in the car. I was like, that's hard enough, getting them all
That's
in the car. You
Oh,
know?
when I had to take my nieces somewhere, or like the other day I was leaving, going, where the heck was I going? But it's such a thing when you have all these people, and so I think for moms, especially if you have an underlying perfectionism, which a lot of us do, like this
Mhm.
type A personality,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden now your life is literally turned upside down.
Mhm.
How do you not develop anxiety? And so, we know from the research that about 6 to 27% of women within 6 months of birth will develop postpartum anxiety, some
Which is
aspect of
which
it.
is high. I mean,
That's
up to
really
20. I
high.
mean, 27%. It's like we're talking about a little bit more than a quarter of women,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. I don't think that part is talked about enough, right?
Yeah.
So again, I'm really glad. I mean, I'm really grateful to Brooke Shields for having brought that into,
That's right.
the cultural awareness in the United States. And I want people to be aware that postpartum anxiety can happen too, that, if you are, just feeling, um, like, you are just not hanging on, right?
Right.
Like you
Ugh,
are,
on by a thread. Yeah.
yes, hanging on by a thread, like that, like you deserve support, like you deserve help, right?
Yes.
um but I think it's important to, because obviously on this podcast, I don't want to spend too, I'm not going to kind of go through all the diagnostic criteria.
Yeah.
There are a lot of wonderful resources out there, like adaa.org, for example, if women want to learn more about postpartum disorders, right?
Yeah.
And kind of going through the criteria. So if any, not just women, if there are other other partners out
Partners
there.
supporting people through it.
Yes,
Sure. Yeah.
yes,
Because I
yes,
think that's a good point too. I'm glad you brought that up because I
yes.
think, the
Well, we have people, like, if we have any transgender men or non-binary listeners, right, that might be
right.
going through pregnancy as well. That's also important to acknowledge, right?
Absolutely. Or just, and partners in general
And
of
partners in general, yes.
that if you're,
Your
uh,
partner is struggling in some way,
yeah,
yeah.
it's hard to just watch that,
Yes.
and so resources there. That's a good one.
So, I think what I want to maybe talk a little bit more about here, Pete, is that just in addition to somebody being aware of, like, am I struggling too much? Am I too anxious? I think we want to kind of come back to this idea of, sometimes I think people don't want to acknowledge it because there's this story that exists
Well, you
in our
talk about
culture.
that
Yeah.
fantasy too. I
The
like that you said that. I
fantasy.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fantasy that being a new parent, and I've heard this word frequently, and I have such a reaction to it actually, is that you're supposed to be experiencing bliss,
Yeah.
right?
I
I
mean,
hear
come
that
on.
word. Yeah, and so, you know, I will say, obviously, there's probably people listening saying, like, well, I felt bliss, or I fell in love with my
Oh yeah.
baby, the second that my baby was born, and that's certainly possible.
Right.
That's certainly
Right.
possible. So I'm not trying to take that away from anybody, though. What I want to say to people, what I say to patients all the time is, look, number one, this is a very stressful experience on the body,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
Very
yeah.
stressful experience on the body. However your labor went, right? Maybe it was, maybe it was like a natural birth. Maybe you had a vaginal delivery. Maybe you had a C-section. But, like, whatever it is, like, this is hard on the body.
Well, I was just going to say that too because you talked about with Jen Rhodes, Dr. Rhodes, with as a reproductive psychiatrist,
Yes.
and I also think so. This one article was looking at PTSD, which I
Hmm.
think that's also an anxiety diagnosis these days,
It's
right?
in
Isn't it?
DSM-5. I think
I
they made
think
it.
so.
I know this is.
Producers, where are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh wait, they don't exist.
It was for a long time considered the anxiety disorder. I would say it is. I'm going to say clinically, yes. PTSD is in the anxiety
Right.
disorder
And so
category.
like
Yeah.
if you think about what some people go through from, conception to birth, there's a lot of
Yes.
trauma that people experience. So to me it's validating and makes sense that this article Elena Ali looked at about almost 2,500 patients,
Hmm.
over like 800 articles that she reviewed in this meta-analysis, and found that PTSD was also common. And so I think I wanted to bring that up
Hmm.
because I think that's also a big
Yes.
piece of the anxiety, because your body goes through trauma. And my sister-in-law had Irish twins, so she had two.
Oh, wow.
She
Oh my,
delivered two babies in the same year. One baby
wow.
was in January and the second baby was in
Wow.
December. And during her second pregnancy, she'd be like, "Oh, I have to go to the orthopedic because my hip hurts." And I'm like, "Sister, you've been pregnant
Wow.
for 2 years.
Right.
Like, of course your hip hurts."
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and by the way, that's not even including like sometimes there is actual trauma, right? Like that
Of-
if
yeah.
that there's
Like
like if
what? Like what?
like an emergency C-section, right? If the
Yes.
baby's in distress, if
Yes.
mom's in distress,
Oh
right?
my God, I was
Or
with my best friend when she gave birth to the twins, and then she had a C-section, and then like afterwards, they don't feel their legs for a while because of however,
it's
the
so
anesthesia.
yes, uh-huh.
Dad would be great with.
Yeah,
But like
yeah.
I was like, "Oh my God, you don't feel your legs. What
And
is that?"
and it's absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's like there's actual trauma. And then I'm even thinking, and then sometimes there's even trauma like with the medical system. Like, for example, there's a lot of, there's been some articles recently and there's research about, Black women's experience,
Oh God, yeah.
with maternal care, that they're at higher risk for, I think there's like a higher risk for, like, you know, har- like, I don't know if it's like fetal death or like,
Yeah.
or maternal death as well. I mean, really
Yeah, yeah,
scary,
yeah, yeah.
scary stuff. So there's so much that can happen, right? And the story though, again, around labor and delivery, right, is this is like this is the best day of your life. This
Right.
is
That
beautiful.
fantasy, yeah.
The fantasy that it's so beautiful. And so again, I'm not trying to say that you're not going to or can't experience moments of love and connection
Sure.
and joy, right? It just we do a real disservice to new parents, and here obviously we've been talking a lot about women specifically. uh,
Well, because they're the ones that give birth.
yes, well, yes, exactly, yeah.
So
Correct,
that's okay for
correct,
this
yes,
episode. Just
that
putting
is,
that
yeah,
out there.
yeah, okay, fair. So it's fair. So 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 with women, when we tell them like it's going to be this amazing thing, so that when if they have a hard time, even if you don't go through trauma but it's just really hard or
Yeah.
scary, that then there starts to be a secondary reaction of like, what's wrong with me?
That's right.
Why, right? What's wrong? There's a questioning of that, and then that starts to feed into, and I see this a lot with, I work a lot, still do work a lot with new moms, where they'll say, I'm not in love with the baby right
Oh my
away.
God, yeah.
Right? Do you hear that? I mean, I'll say I'm not, and I'll say to them,
Totally.
first thing I say, I go, guess what? You don't know this little person yet. That's what I say. I say it all the time. I'm like, do you? But also, what I'll do is I'll focus on actually the biological aspect. I'll say, well, are you experiencing? This also sometimes is a way I'm assessing for postpartum depression. I'll
Sure.
say, are you experiencing like, um, a sense of maybe like protection, or like just even going through the motions of like, you can tell like I want to take care of or protect this little being. And a lot of times they'll say yes. If they say no, sometimes that can be an indication that there is actually postpartum depression. There's really
Right.
like even an aversion
Yeah.
sometimes can happen, which again, that's something a lot of women feel shame about, right?
The shame
So
is a big piece, and I just think from an empathy perspective, like if I sleep really well, and if I have one night like a year that I don't sleep well, I'm miserable. And so like these new moms are like not sleeping.
I know. Well, it's like this baby is like up every hour or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So,
Oh,
yeah, so then it's like, so there's a story like, well, you should be experiencing bliss. You should be
yeah.
in love with this baby. We can then start to go into like, you should lose the baby weight,
You should
right?
breastfeed.
You should breastfeed. That's a big one.
That's a
Ooh, that's a
big.
big one. Ooh, do I have that conversation a lot, right? We
Yeah.
hear the story, the old like breast is best,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sort of all around
And if the baby doesn't
teaching.
latch, the baby don't latch.
Yeah, right.
It
So
happens.
I have to recommend, and I recommend this to patients. There's a great show. I don't know if I've talked to you about it before, Pete, called Adam Ruins Everything. Have you ever heard of the show?
No. What
Oh,
I
it's
have to.
hilarious. It's Adam Conover is his name. He's a comedian, and I would say it's really like a CBT show because he's all about myth busting. He loves facts,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's done in this very cute way. And every episode is titled something like Adam ruins sex. Adam ruins Adam ruins college or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's really what he's doing. It sounds negative, but the whole point is that he's helping people to like see things as they are, which at the end you feel relieved, right?
That's
And
right.
so one of the episodes is Adam ruins having a baby.
Yeah.
And I've given it as homework for a lot of
Oh,
patients
I
because
want to
he
watch
goes,
it now.
oh, it's fantastic. He goes through all of these things like statistics about, um, uh, fantasies that people have about pregnancy and postpartum and what the actual statistics are.
Yeah.
And like anyway, just there's some great nuggets in there, but one of them they talk about breastfeeding,
Yeah.
and he'll say it's like, I think the statistic is something like, it's like 15% of women like can't
Yeah.
breastfeed. It's like, what if you don't produce milk? Like, what do you think they did 100 years ago?
That happens too.
You think
There
you were
was,
a bad person? It's
no,
like,
exactly.
no.
There was an episode too about that where there's, now there's like a market for breast milk, which is an
I
interesting,
Yes, yes,
conversation because we don't know enough about it. And I think most endocrinologists say that that's like, it's actually just, it's got to be like the baby's mom's milk. Like it's, if
yes.
it's someone
Uh-huh.
else's, it's not the
That's my
same.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think it will be helpful for people just to hear, because I think if I talk, I know we're not going to go into like the differential diagnoses between, but I think just to listen to some of the symptoms, because
Hmm.
the other truth is, as we talk about 6 to 27%, that's for those that report and actually seek treatment. And you and I
Right,
both know that the numbers are likely higher, because if
right.
I think of just as an overall sad mood, a loss of interest, decreased fatigue or loss of energy, changes in your appetite, changes in sleep issues. I mean, these are all
Hmm.
things that are going to occur after you have a
Correct,
baby, no matter what.
correct.
Guilt, shame, like you talked
Yes.
about.
Yes. Well, so I think I guess I'll throw in some sort of like non-diagnostic indicators that
Yeah,
somebody might look for as in addition to some diagnostic ones. I would say if somebody's really not feeling like themselves. I know that
yeah,
sounds very general, but and look, to be clear, having a new baby, like everything's upside down. So it's not like you're going to
everything.
feel
Yeah.
settled. Yeah, it's right. Like you're going to kind of, especially like the first month after, it's sort of like, what's up,
Where
what's
am
down,
I?
where am I? Right. So when I say like not feeling like yourself, it's like feeling very disconnected from yourself, very disconnected from the baby, feeling
Yeah,
very disconnected, from your partner, right? So I think that's a really important one to be aware of. If anyone's experiencing extremely intense anxiety, so not just like I'm kind of, I'm feeling a little anxious in my body, like my chest is a little tight, it's like you're feeling panic,
yeah,
it's like a sense like a loss of control,
yeah.
right? Maybe like intense physiological symptoms, like there's an elephant sitting on your chest,
Oh, yeah, that's the
right?
worst.
Or like constant nausea, extremely intense heart rate, um extreme obsessive thoughts,
Yeah,
right? So everybody's going to do checking, is the baby breathing, right?
yeah,
that
everyone does
that's
that.
everyone does that,
Yeah,
right? But if you cannot get yourself to sleep, right, if you're like, they always
yeah.
say a lot of times, like when baby naps, mom and dad should nap,
Heck yeah.
if you can't find yourself being able to do that because you're so terrified that something's going to happen, it's
Or
like,
you're cleaning too much or things like that. You
yeah,
gotta nap when baby
yeah,
naps. Yeah.
yeah,
So I'd
exactly.
like that you said the ADAA, just for our listeners, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. I will say though, don't be looking too much stuff up. I think so for me, like a
Great point.
critical
Yes.
intervention is going to be like, do things that feel good. So invite like a family member over who might be able to give you a little bit of a break. Maybe go
Mhm,
get your nails done. Maybe get a massage. Maybe buy like put hot water in your bathtub and just sit there for a couple minutes on
mhm.
your, do some things so that you can really just care for yourself. Try not to look up too much stuff until you get into like a place where maybe it feels desperate, but I would say just
Yes.
get away from the Google. How many
A-
times?
oh my, absolutely. Well, and and it's again, I know I keep coming back to this, but I actually was just feeling sad when you were saying the part about like recommending self-care, because
Yeah,
that's what I always see people say, like, but I can't. But and that goes back to the fantasy of like being a good mom means I have no identity,
yeah.
right? Like my identity is the baby. My baby is everything. And it's like, you know, this I would say like it's being a parent is additive in your
Yeah.
life, right? It's not about like replacing who you are.
Well, and I had a dad recently say that in session where he was
Mm,
like, I realize that I'm not going to stop growing after baby gets here because he
the,
feels like unsure of whether or not he's ready to be a dad. It's like, okay, it's
mm,
too late, it's coming.
right.
And you're not going to stop growing once the baby's
That's right.
here.
No, you're
Yeah.
not.
And
But the
I love that you said that too, because I think with my sister-in-law, for example, for like some of the baby's birthdays, I also got her a present, which was like a spa package, because I felt like,
oh,
frankly, that's where it should be. Like, go take a day away from your child. Like that, I think that
but
fantasy is like I'm supposed to want to be there all the time.
correct. Well,
Yeah.
and social media exacerbates that, right?
Ugh.
Everybody, the birth and like the gender reveal, the birth announcements, all of these things. And again, if any listeners out there are engaging that, I don't say that as a judgment that
Yeah.
that's something bad. It's more just I want there to be an increased awareness around that this contributes to this broader story about, you know, the early period of a new parent's life and the new baby's life, as
Yeah.
it should be blissful. And it's like, it's hard. And, you know, Pete and
Yeah.
I talk about all the time, like that, you know, we said in a previous episode, I can't remember which one actually, but like I always have a joke like that it's like a secret of the universe, though it's not really a secret of the universe, that
Yeah.
actually in order to connect with these more pleasant emotions like joy and love and connection itself, we actually first have to be willing to come into contact with what we don't want and what's uncomfortable. And how that applies with this is knowing that having a new baby is hard,
Yeah.
right? And there might be times when you're struggling more than you thought that you would be.
And I'm so glad you shared your expertise. And I think it was, the people that you were able to work with and with Dr. Rhodes, I think are so lucky to be able to have you. And I think, these are really critical periods of their time. And so, I think you've really shed some light on that. So I wonder if we can have some just parting words. What do you think about this idea of how postpartum anxiety or postpartum struggles are natural?
I think just with that, I want people to just really remember that it is not only okay to struggle postpartum, that's what's normative, not the fantasy. This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.